In the silence between tides, where the Atlantic meets the restless land, a city was born, not from peace, but from ambition. They called it New Amsterdam. A wooden fort, a handful of settlers, and a dream: to trade, to rule, to survive. Over centuries, that fragile dream became something colossal. A heartbeat of commerce. A forge of empires. A city that would never sleep, because the world itself could not stop watching. From the smoke of revolutions to the hum of machines, from the cries of immigrants to the thunder of skyscrapers rising through clouds, New York became more than a city. It became a story. The story of humanity's greatest experiment: freedom, greed, and destiny intertwined in glass and steel. This is the rise of New York. In the early 1600s, the world was ruled not by kings, but by merchants. Across the seas, sails carried not just goods, but the ambitions of empires. Among them, one small nation dared to dream bigger than its size: the Dutch Republic. The Dutch were traders, navigators, and mapmakers of a new age. Their ships crossed oceans, bringing spices from the East Indies, silks from China, and furs from the cold forests of the New World. They built an empire not with armies, but with contracts, and at its heart stood the Dutch East India Company, the first great multinational corporation in history. But the Dutch wanted more. They wanted a foothold in North America, a place to control trade between Europe and the New World. And so, in 1624, they sailed into a natural harbor at the mouth of the Hudson River and planted their flag. They called it New Amsterdam, New Amsterdam. It was a settlement of hope, windmills, and wooden houses built on marshy land. The streets were muddy, the winters harsh, and the future uncertain. But trade flowed, and with trade came power. Fur was their gold. The Dutch bartered with the Lenape people, exchanging beads, cloth, and tools for beaver pelts that would fetch fortunes back in Europe. It was said that for 60 guilders worth of trinkets, they purchased the island of Manhattan, a deal that would become one of history's greatest ironies. From the beginning, New Amsterdam was unlike any other colony. While others sought to conquer, the Dutch sought to trade. It became a mosaic of cultures: Dutch, African, English, Jewish, and native peoples, living, trading, and arguing side by side. Freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and the rule of commerce became its unwritten laws. But even as the little town prospered, the winds of empire shifted. To the north, the English built New England. To the south, they grew strong in Virginia. And between these rival powers sat a vulnerable Dutch outpost, small, wealthy, and dangerously tempting. The seed of New York was growing, but so was the shadow that would soon consume it. By the mid-1600s, the Dutch colony of New Amsterdam had become a jewel of commerce, a bustling port filled with merchants, sailors, and dreamers. But across the sea, another empire was watching, one that had never liked sharing trade or power. The British Empire had grown restless. Its colonies in New England and Virginia were thriving, yet one thing stood in their way: the Dutch stronghold on the Hudson. For England, New Amsterdam wasn't just a trading post, it was a threat. A wedge of foreign influence sitting between their territories. In 1664, King Charles II made his move. He granted his brother, the Duke of York, a charter to seize the Dutch colony. And with that royal command, 4 English warships sailed into the harbor, their cannons aimed at Fort Amsterdam. The Dutch governor, Peter Stuyvesant, was a man of pride and iron will. He wanted to fight, to defend the city that he had helped build from mud and chaos. But the merchants, the families, the ordinary settlers, they refused. Trade mattered more than war. And so, without a single shot fired, the Dutch surrendered. New Amsterdam became New York, named in honor of the Duke who had claimed it. A city built on commerce was conquered by diplomacy. Yet even under British rule, the Dutch spirit never vanished. The laws, the trade networks, even many of the street names, they all remained. English governors came and went, but the city's true ruler was always the same: money. New York became a crossroads of empire, where goods from the Caribbean, furs from the north, and slaves from Africa all passed through its ports. The city grew rich, but its wealth came at a price, built on the backs of the enslaved and the exploited. By 1700, nearly 20% of New York's population were enslaved Africans, forced to build its streets, docks, and mansions. Still, New York thrived. Under the British flag, it became one of the most diverse, dynamic, and ambitious cities in the colonies. And beneath the daily rhythm of trade, something new began to stir: a quiet resentment toward the distant crown. The merchants who once traded under Dutch banners now traded under British ones. But loyalty was fading. The city that had once bowed to one empire was learning how to stand for itself. The seeds of revolution had already been sown. By the 1760s, New York had become one of Britain's proudest possessions, a glittering port where ships from across the Atlantic unloaded tea, rum, and silver. But beneath the polished surface, rebellion was brewing. The colonists had grown wealthy, but they were tired of being told how to live, what to buy, and whom to serve. The British Parliament demanded taxes, the Stamp Act, the Tea Act, the Townshend duties, all designed to remind the colonies who was in charge. But in New York, that command met resistance. Merchants refused to import British goods. Crowds filled the streets, shouting for liberty. And the Sons of Liberty, a secret group of patriots, began to make themselves heard. No taxation without representation, they cried. And for the first time, those words echoed down the narrow lanes of Manhattan. The harbor that once welcomed British ships now watched them with suspicion. Pamphlets, speeches, and secret meetings spread through taverns like wildfire. By 1775, open rebellion had erupted, and New York found itself caught between loyalty and liberty. When George Washington marched his army into the city, he called it the key to the continent. He knew that whoever controlled New York controlled America. But the British knew that too. In 1776, British warships returned, not to trade, but to conquer. Flames swept through the city. Wooden houses turned to ash. The sky glowed red over the harbor. New York burned, and with it, the illusion of peace. For the next 7 years, New York would serve as the headquarters of the British Army, a city under occupation. Spies moved through the shadows, families were divided, and whispers of freedom traveled in secret across enemy lines. When victory finally came in 1783, the British withdrew, and George Washington rode through the city's cheering streets. New York, scarred and exhausted, had survived, not as a colony, but as a symbol. It had seen tyranny. It had endured war. And now, it stood at the dawn of something entirely new, a nation. The revolution had not destroyed New York. It had transformed it. From this moment forward, the city's destiny would no longer belong to kings or governors. It would belong to the dreamers, to those who came chasing liberty and stayed to build it. The war was over. The colonies had become a nation. And New York, battered, burned, and reborn, was ready to rise again. By the early 1800s, the city was changing faster than anyone could imagine. Ships filled the harbor, markets overflowed with goods, and merchants spoke in half a dozen languages. It was a place of opportunity and of chaos. In 1825, everything changed. The Erie Canal opened, a man-made river stretching over 350 miles, connecting New York City to the Great Lakes. Overnight, it transformed trade. Goods could now flow from the American interior straight to Manhattan's docks. The city became the beating heart of a growing empire, America's empire of commerce. Wealth poured in. So did people. By the mid-19th century, immigrants arrived by the thousands every week. Irish fleeing famine, Germans escaping revolution, Italians seeking a new beginning. They stepped off ships at Castle Garden, later at Ellis Island, carrying nothing but hope. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The words that would one day be carved beneath the Statue of Liberty were not just poetry. They were prophecy. But the streets of gold were also streets of struggle. Tenements overflowed. Diseases spread. And yet, through hardship, something extraordinary happened. A city of strangers became a city of strength. Brick by brick, steel by steel, the skyline began to rise. Wall Street turned into the financial capital of the world. Newspapers, theaters, and factories multiplied. And then came the iron bones that would change everything, the Brooklyn Bridge. When it opened in 1883, it wasn't just an engineering marvel, it was a declaration. A bridge that connected more than land. It connected dreams. The 19th century was New York's golden age, the age of titans. Men like J.P. Morgan, Cornelius Vanderbilt, and John D. Rockefeller built fortunes that reshaped America itself. The skyline climbed, fortunes rose, and ambition became the city's religion. But under the glitter, shadows still lingered. The gap between rich and poor widened. Labor strikes shook the streets. And behind every mansion on Fifth Avenue stood the exhausted workers who built it. New York was no longer just a city. It was a reflection of the human spirit, brilliant and flawed, rich and restless, forever reaching higher. As the century turned, the city prepared for its next transformation, an era of machines, lights, and towers that would scrape the heavens. The dawn of the 20th century painted New York in steel and ambition. The streets thundered with trolleys and carriages. The skyline, once humble, now pierced the clouds. The world was changing, and New York stood at its center. In 1904, the city opened its first subway line, connecting downtown Manhattan to Harlem and Brooklyn. It was more than a transportation project. It was a statement of power, a living network beneath the streets, pulsing with millions of lives every day. Above ground, another revolution was rising, the skyscraper age. The Flatiron Building, the Chrysler Building, the Empire State Building, each new tower taller than the last, symbols of human audacity turned into architecture. To build higher was to believe higher. The skyline became a prayer written in glass and stone. By the roaring 1920s, New York was alive with jazz, speakeasies, and electric light. Harlem pulsed with music, Times Square shimmered, and Wall Street roared with the sound of unending wealth. Until, one October morning in 1929, the roar stopped. The stock market collapsed. Fortunes vanished. Hope cracked like glass. The Great Depression swept through the city like a storm. Banks closed. Factories shut down. Families built makeshift homes in Central Park, calling them Hoovervilles. And yet, even in its darkest hour, New York refused to die. When the war came, it rose again. From its docks sailed ships carrying men, machines, and dreams, America's arsenal of democracy. The war ended. The soldiers returned. And a new New York was born. The United Nations headquarters opened in 1952, marking New York as not just America's city, but the world's. Art thrived in its galleries, music in its clubs, and finance in its towers. But the higher the city climbed, the deeper its shadows grew. The 1970s brought crime, blackouts, and near bankruptcy. Yet again, New York fought back, brick by brick, beat by beat. Artists, dreamers, hustlers, they all gave the city new life. Disco echoed through Studio 54. Hip-hop was born in the Bronx. A new culture began to rise from the ruins. And then, in 2001, the unthinkable happened. Two towers, the proud symbols of global ambition, fell in a cloud of smoke and sorrow. The world watched in silence. But even from the ashes, the city rose again. Because New York does not end. It transforms. It remembers, rebuilds, and roars back louder than before. Today, from the glittering edge of Hudson Yards to the quiet corners of Central Park, New York stands as a testament that no matter how many times it falls, it will always rise again. It is more than a city. It is a heartbeat, a miracle made of millions, and its story will never end.